Welcome to Module 4, where we're going to be talking about painting the light key of diffused light, in particular, fog, rain, and humidity. What we'll cover today is the difference between direct light, which is what we've been working with so far, and diffused light. We'll be talking about common diffused light atmospheric conditions, and the general light key or light envelope and shadow color key for the diffused atmospheric light. And finally, the specific light key envelope for our demo photos. So, what's the difference between direct light and diffused light? Direct light, what we've worked with so far, is strong in contrast in its color. So it means there's strong contrast between value, hue, intensity, and temperature, all four aspects of color. There are strong highlights, very light values and colors, and strong shadows. There's lots of reflected, bounced light. And think about what that means. If the light source is high in the sky, the light is going to beam down, and any other surfaces that are around are going to reflect some of that light back and then around the subject area. There will be lots of color variation. Because of the reflected, bounced light, you will have colors that are impacted by all of the surrounding colors. There'll be clearly defined edges and surfaces because of the strong, raking light. Think about our pecan tree from earlier. In this image, you can see exactly what I was talking about. We have strong contrast in value, in particular between those shadow areas and the highlights. We have very, very strong contrast between temperatures. Look at all of the greens there. We have cool greens, we have warm greens, and we have a full range in between. We have lots of reflected, bounced light that is bouncing back up into the shadow areas, for example. Lots of color variation. Look at those sharp, crisp edges on even the shadow areas. So if you look, for example, in the shadow area over here to the side, on the left-hand side, you'll see that there is still a clearly defined separation between the shadow of the pecan tree and the background. That's a mark of strong, clear, direct light. In contrast, diffused light is very low in contrast. It means that there is a low contrast between value, so the values are close together, the hues are close together, the intensities are fairly close together, and the temperatures are close together. There is not necessarily a complete diminishing of intensity. That's a common misconception. It's just that there's less contrast in all the different aspects of color. You're going to get fairly weak highlights and minimal shadows. So color areas will appear flat rather than having a lot of dimension. There isn't as much deep space or illusion of deep space when you have very diffused light. Because the light is diffused, there's very little to no reflected light bouncing around, another contributing factor to that flat sense of color. There's a limited variation in color, so the hues themselves will be closer together. You'll have softened edges and minimal to no shadows. So, prime example of our diffused light is one of the demo photos that we're going to be working with. In this image, in this subject, you see the beginnings of a rainstorm. So over on the left-hand side, rain is falling. And when you look at the shadow, or rather the separation of the clouds between each other, the edges are very, very soft. And in fact, the edges of where the cloud meets the land can become softened as well when there are more particles falling. So you end up with softer edges particularly in the distance when you have atmospheric conditions. When you look at the colors, you still have rich color, but you have very limited range of color here. So, great example of diffused light. The light, and you can tell where the light source is the sun over to the right-hand side. But that beam of light coming from the sun is being broken up by all those particles of moisture in the sky. Common diffused light situations are things like overcast skies, rain, mist, and smoke, one of my favorites. We're going to look at some examples of each of these. And remember that the qualities of diffused light are that it's low contrast in color, weak highlights and minimal shadows, little to no reflected light, very limited color variation, and softened edges. So let's see how that works in real life. So in this photograph of a cotton field, it's a misty, overcast morning. There really isn't fog rising, but there is a lot of diffused light because of the very thick cloud cover. So you have very flat areas of color, even in the field immediately in front of you. Very limited shadows, and almost no shadow at all. Look at that farmhouse on the left-hand side. There's almost no separation between the plane of the roof, which is at a very different angle than the front face of the house. So because of the very diffused light, you have very little shadow separating out the different planes of the objects. And again, in the rainstorm over the marsh, where there is more moisture falling, you have much softer edges and lower contrast in value. So I think this is a really good one to look at the contrast from left to right. On the left-hand side is where the rain has started. On the right-hand side is where the storm is moving in. So you're seeing at a great distance as the storm cloud moves over a broad, flat area. So on the left-hand side, very, very soft light, very, very soft edges, very, very low, limited contrast in those clouds. On the right-hand side, you have a little bit more, even though it's still diffused light, because you don't have quite as many particles of moisture in the air. In our mist photo, you see very limited light, and it's late in the afternoon, and the mist is rising off of the earth. That's one of those conditions that happens in warm climates as the temperature drops at night. So when the earth has been warmed up during the day and the temp drops at night, then moisture condenses and rises up from the ground. When that happens, you end up with very softened sections in the subject. So where the mist is, how we know where mist is where the contrast is suddenly lowered in the color. So you have higher contrast above towards the sky and lower contrast below towards the ground. And in that layer in between where the mist is, everything is much more limited. A really interesting lighting effect, and one that's a little bit more unusual, is smoke. Most atmospheric particles that have to do with moisture have a color that tends towards blue. And so things will have a bluish overcast color to them. In tendency, not always, but normally. When you look at the color of smoke, in particular, look here on the right-hand side between the cloud's edge and that first band of trees. Now the smoke is impacting the whole background, but you can really see clearly the color of the smoke in that lower section of the sky as it moves towards the tree band. It is a dirty yellow color. So the particles of ash that have floated up into the air that create smoke are a radically different color than the particles of moisture that in the air that create either rain or mist. So if you miss that change in color, it will look like mist instead of smoke. So smoke is warmer, mist is cooler. And you can see where I've exaggerated that just a little bit in the painting that I did from this in order to help convey that illusion. So I've warmed up the smoke significantly here to help convey that illusion. Remember, in painting, you want to exaggerate those contrasts just a little bit in order to create that illusion when people view it from a distance. So let's look in a little bit closer at the light key envelope for our demo photos before we dive into painting. So again, here's our mist photo. And one of the things that's going to happen with mist in particular is the colors will move closer together. And another thing that will happen as you move towards a later time of day or very, very early morning is the colors will become cooler, and again, they'll become closer. So all of those things are impacting this particular image. The time of day is in that transition time between afternoon and evening, and then we have the mist rising. So we have cooler colors altogether, and then we have lower contrast because of the mist. And again, that band where the mist is lying towards the center here, the lower 1/3 right about in here in the image, is going to be significantly lower in contrast. So we get the effect of mist from that lowered contrast. Also note how soft the edges are. There really are very few defined shapes caught within that mist. To make the mist become fog or more intensely mist, more dense, then you're going to diminish the edges even more. You can see the contrast in the lowered contrast in value when you look at the image in black and white. So if we desaturate the photo and remove all the color information except for value, you can see how very close together the values are here. And in particular, how close together the values are where the mist is. So the contrast in value in the area where the mist is has lowered to about a 3. So a wide range of contrast in a strong lighting situation would be a contrast of about 8. The difference between value 1 and value 9. Here, because we're looking at diffused lower light, it's a contrast of only about 3 where that mist section is. So remember, hues are closer together. We are really working with what's called analogous colors here, colors that are closer to each other on the color wheel. But notice that there is still a lot of saturated color. I don't want you to paint just grays when you go to diffused light. There's a lot of rich color here. You have strong blues, you have strong purples, and you have some really wonderful neutrals that set those strong colors off. So don't abandon hue and saturation when you're moving towards diffused light. You just have more gradual changes and softer edges and lower contrast. In our rain photo, again, many of the same things are happening because it's a different time of day. It's morning. We have stronger light than we did in the mist photo, but we still have very diffused light. So when you look at the color here, there is still strong, rich color in the marsh. But look what's happening as you move into the distance. Those colors rapidly de-intensify, neutralize, and lower in contrast. So because of the vast distance here, you do get a sense of depth, but there is not the strong contrast that you would have in a well-lit situation. When you look at it in black and white, desaturated, again, you can really tell how much lower the contrast in value is. When you look at it in color, you feel like there's more contrast than there really is. Look at it in black and white, and you can see how much lower it is. So again, our particular lighting situation here, our particular envelope is the time of day is morning. So we're going to have a little bit more of angled light than we had in the fog and mist. But we have moving rain moving in, so there's a lot of diffusion between the foreground and the background. So rapidly softened edges, rapidly neutralized colors, and rapidly narrowing of contrast. So what we've gone over today is the difference between direct light and diffused light, common diffused light atmospheric conditions, the general light key for diffused atmospheric light, and the specific light key envelope for our demo photos. Hope this has been helpful, and I want you to do the work and make it real. So practice seeing the light key. Practice recognizing the color qualities of diffused atmospheric light. And I would really recommend that you use a color spot tool to help yourself analyze those colors in your subject as you're working on your observational skills. That's all for now. Happy painting, everyone.